Hello, I'm Mrs. Ennis, and I'm the tour guide here at Baxter House Museum. So glad to welcome you here today for this virtual tour. The museum was built in 1797, and when it was first built, it stood at the front of the property, just like all the other buildings and houses on this street. But about 100 years ago, to create it a museum and make way for the library, it was moved back to where you see it now. It was the home of a town doctor here in Gorham in 1797 when it was first built, and he was a doctor here for 15 years. In 1812, he went off to help with the War of 1812, and Dr. Baxter and his family moved in. Dr. Baxter was also town doctor here, and he had a son named James Finney Baxter, who grew up and became mayor of Portland. He was elected mayor 6 times, so he was a popular guy. People kept voting for him. And Mayor Baxter had a son named Percival, or Percy, who grew up and became governor of the whole state of Maine. So we have Dr. Baxter, Mayor Baxter, and Governor Baxter, and that's how we keep our Baxters straight. We're going to head in and take a look at the parlor for some Town of Gorham history. And we start our discussion of Town of Gorham history with a picture of a lady. In this picture, the lady she's an older lady or a grandma, but she'll always be known and remembered as a child or a baby, because in this version of her picture, it says that Mary Gorham Finney was the first white child born in Gorham, Maine. Now, why do we make that distinction? Why do we say the first white child? Were there other people here? If you think there were, you're right. There were other people here. There were Native Americans, right? Also known as Indians. So they were here already. And when the English settlers came in, Mary Gorham Finney was the first child among those people to be born here in Gorham. It was her dad, Captain John Finney, and his son Edmund, who paddled up the little river and came and settled our town. And they did that in the year 1736. So Mary Gorham Finney is not a Gorham. She's named for Gorhams. There were no Gorhams in Gorham for about the first 20 years. And you say, well, how can that be? Well, we were a land grant given to some settlers down in Massachusetts who had fought in a war against Indians and won the right to this land. And the hero of that war was Captain John Gorham. So we're named for him. And they say this was his chair. And that war that they fought in was fought in 1675. So if this was Captain John Gorham's chair and he fought in a war in 1675, I say that's a pretty old chair. Here we have a shelf full of household items and everyday items. And here you have a shoe. It's a child's shoe, almost like a baby bootie. And this is a shoe form. So there were shoemakers in town. There were tanneries in town. They were processing leather. And next to those would spring up shoemakers. So the shoemaker would use these wooden forms and would wrap the leather around them to make the form for shoes. So they're making shoes right here in Gorham in the 1800s. Then we have another household item. This one is a little newer. It's more early 1900s. And you can see Gorham Savings Bank. Well, that's still a going business. There's a Gorham Savings Bank right on Main Street, and there's branches in other towns. But this is back in the early 1900s. And you could take this bank home and save your money in it. So they have a place for cents and a place for nickels, and even a place for halves, half dollars and quarters, and you could watch that money grow. But when you wanted to go and use your money, you had to go down to the bank and get the key because they had the key. So it's what we call an example of Yankee thrift, right? You're saving your money, you're watching it grow, you're thinking about how to spend it, right? When you go down to the bank for the key, you better have a good reason. They're gonna ask you probably, it's a small town. What do you want to spend your money on? You know, don't spend it all on candy, right? So Yankee thrift is what that's an example of. We're headed over here to the fireplace, and this is pretty much where it's at for heat. In the 1800s, if you want to stay warm, you're going over to the fireplace. You can see there are cradles here. You might bring your baby by the fire, maybe not quite so close, but this is the idea that people gathered at the fireplace, gathered around the hearth to keep warm. And we know still our winters are cold here in Maine. But you know, people decided to innovate a bit and invent. So we talk about Yankee ingenuity here in the museum. So they're innovating. They said, you know, it's too bad we always have to crowd right here by the fire. Wouldn't it be nice if we could take some of the fire with us? So they would scoop some embers from the fire and scoop them into this pail, and then they'd close it up in this box, And then they could put this by their feet if they're sewing or reading by the window, and bring it over there, and they called this a foot warmer. So I call it a space heater, and mine has a plug, but it's the same idea, right? To keep warm in other parts of the room that aren't quite so near the fire. They would even take their foot warmers into their horse and buggy with them, right? Because there's no button or switch to turn like we do in our cars to keep warm. So they would bring this in with them and keep their feet warm while they were driving, riding around in their horse and buggies. And they would drive that horse and buggy up to church, the First Parish Church, the one with the steeple and the clock. And they would take their foot warmer out of their horse and buggy, and they would bring it in with them, bring it right into church. And as they went into church, when they got to the end of their pew, right, which is the benches where people sit in church, they would find this pew door. We call it a door, but it would only stand like, it's more like a gate. But it's a pew door, they call it, because it looks like a door, but it stands about this high on the ends of those benches, right? And so they would open that little pew door, and they would bring their foot warmer and put it in at their feet, at their pew, and they would sit and have church on Sunday. This pew door comes from the First Parish Church. You can see it's numbered. It has the number 35. What the people at the church decided to do is they said, you know, people like to sit in the same spot week after week in church. Let's use that for the support of the church. We'll use that fact. What we'll do is we'll rent the pews. And they did. And people rented the pew that they liked best. And people became so associated, so connected with their pew, that we even have here a book of Psalms, right, part of the Bible, that has the name of William McClellan. The McClellans were the second family in town after the Finneys. And on his book of Psalms, embossed in the leather, is pew number 121. Right? So he's not leaving that spot anytime soon. He likes it right there. Now, another item of which we have many in the museum is samplers. Here's one that is stitched by Amelia Lowell. So a sampler is a picture made of stitches, usually done by girls, rather young girls, in this case just 11 years old, only a few years older than you. So if you want to get started, you better hurry, because she's going to be a tough act to follow. It's got, we believe, a scene from Portland made entirely of stitches. And then you have canvas and stitches on it, right? Flowers and vines and things. She's got lettering, an alphabet, several alphabets, numbers. A lot of times there's a prayer. So this one ends, crowned with the blessings of the Almighty's love, right? And we have an expert stitcher who helps us in the museum, and she doesn't even know how some of these are done. So Amelia Lowell was quite good at stitching. But if you'll notice in the alphabet, and look along there, you'll notice that there is a letter missing. Can you see what letter is missing there? The J is missing, right? So these are Christian folk. So Jesus is God, and as well as she stitches, she's not God, right? So she's kind of honoring God by leaving out the first letter of his name and showing her humility or modesty. So we have a missing J in the first alphabet. It is back in the second. It is missing again from the third and back in the fourth. So in all our probably 10 or 12 samplers in the museum, there is a missing J. So when you come and visit in person with your family, which we hope you will do, you can come and look at more of those. We're going to head into the war room. The war room is named mostly because of this big dark painting. It's meant to be dark. It's a night scene. And this is the midnight charge at Chancellorsville. It's a battle in the Civil War, and that's a war in which our country, the United States of America, was at war with itself, the North against the South, right, over whether slavery would be allowed to continue and whether we would remain one nation. And the people from Gorham and from Maine were fighting on the North, the side of the North, and that side won, and slavery was ended, and we remained one nation. The North, which lost this battle, lost 11,000 men in the one battle. But the South, which won, lost 10,000 men. So it was just a huge loss of life on both sides. Soon after this battle was Gettysburg, which the North did win, and then the North began winning more and more and eventually won the war. There is a gentleman from Gorham who fought in this battle and fought in the Civil War. His name was William Strout. He was in the 17th Maine Regiment. This is his canteen or water bottle, right? It's made of metal and there's canvas fabric stretched over it. You can still see canteens or water bottles like this probably in camping stores and things like that. So the soldiers could wear this around them. and then they could take a drink when they got thirsty after marching. And one third grade class asked, did William Strout survive? Did he come home? And I was able to find out that he did. So he lived, he survived, he came home, brought his canteen, so we can now show it here in the museum. Over here on the wall, we have a print of the Declaration of Independence. So it's not an original copy. It would be like a poster. You get a poster of something today that you like to put on your wall. Well, people have always liked to put a copy, a print, a poster of the Declaration of Independence on their wall. So, of course, this is one of our nation's founding documents, and it was ratified on July 4th, 1776. So this is where we get Independence Day, 4th of July, has to do with this founding document. This was, since it's not an original copy, it's a reproduction, it was created by a professor of penmanship, right? So he was teaching people how to write in cursive, like you might be learning. So he was doing that, and he was so good at it that he could recreate all these different signatures of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. So this is an early print. It's 1818, so it's within about 50 years of the original Declaration. And you'll see some of the signers. You've got Benjamin Franklin, you've got John Adams. John Adams said at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, he said, "This day should be celebrated with fireworks." And it was from that day to this. So when you see the fireworks of the 4th of July, you can know that you're part of a tradition that started right at the very beginning. We're going to head into the kitchen. So I'm here at the sink, and something's missing, right? I've got a drain, but I don't have a faucet. That's right. So this sink is missing a faucet. It's what they call a dry sink. And you say, well, how did they know from a wet sink if they didn't have? But probably as it was coming in. So as indoor plumbing was becoming more and more the thing, some people might say, well, no, I don't have a faucet yet. Mine's just a dry sink. So there's a drain, and that still works to send water out. You just can't get water in unless you take this big heavy pail, right? Already heavy, and you're going outside like people did for thousands of years and still do in many places in the world today. You're going to go to a pump or a well, this is in the 1800s, and you are going to fill this with water. And now it's really heavy, and you're going to haul water, and that's what people did and still do in some places in the world today. You're going to bring that water in, and now you can put it here, and then you can wash your dishes, or you can wash your clothes, right? I know probably many of you knew that this was for washing clothes, right? A washboard. Now, where this was innovated, right? In the museum we talk about invention, so thinking up something brand new, and then innovating, right? Tweaking, like iPhone 10 or 11, okay? So you're tweaking it, right? So the way they tweaked this one is they said this side is for your heavy-duty clothes, like jeans, and this side, they say, is for your delicate fabrics, right? So almost like a two-cycle washboard, we call it, right? And, you know, permanent press or heavy duty and gentle. And you probably still have those settings on your washing machine at home. So this is really the beginning of the washing machine. Here we have another fireplace. Now this one isn't just to keep warm, like it is in the parlor and other rooms in the museum. What are we doing here? You can probably tell that we are cooking. We've got pots. And we've got some plants here. These are mostly dried flowers, but they might have had spices hanging. Plants like herbs and spices, and then they would be drying, and then they could pinch off some and season their supper. You know, season that soup or that stew with the spices and the herbs that were hanging above. There were a lot of dairy farms in Gorham. There still are some, but there were many, many more in the 1800s. Farming, it was a whole era, right? The agricultural, the agrarian era. Even Dr. Baxter had a little farm behind this house, you know, so even the doctor had himself a farm, right? So like everyone was doing farming too. So anyway, we had dairy farms, and they were making butter. You're making a whole lot of butter in here. So what they would do is they would sell it, and when they sold it, they would wrap it up in these butter papers, right? And you can probably get the sense that it's very similar to the paper that you find your butter and even your margarine wrapped in today, right? Like a wax paper. This was 8 ounces, so half a pound. So this would be like 2 sticks at once, 2 sticks of butter. And you can see there it's the Plummer Farm in Gorham, Maine, Plummer. And that's still a name in town. There's Plummer's Hardware right on Main Street. So again, people love our town and have always loved it and have loved to stay through the generations. So you'll see people with the same names as were here in the beginning. We'd love to have you come and see us. We're open in the summer from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And you can always call the library to find out about our hours and when to come if you don't remember it from this video. And we would love to see you with your friends and your family and come visit us here in the museum.